Hi, my name is Michael Swartz. I'm going to show you how to rig up a spine in Maya 2015. All right, the first thing, let's just put this geometry on a display layer. And this will just give us better control while we're building our rig. We can turn it on and off. So let's call this geometry. Save that. And let's also template it so that we can see through it, but we won't accidentally select it while we're building our rig. All right, the next thing, let's go to the animation menu and go to skeleton joint tool and reset that tool so it's default. And my character is about 5 grid units tall, but I want to have 6 equidistant segments in my spine, and it should be going perfectly vertically straight up, and each segment should be the same size. So to do that in this sort of situation, I would still use the grid to snap. Okay, so we'll snap with the X key held down onto the grid here. And I'm making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 joints for 6 segments. Okay, now what I need to do now is to scale my joint chain down. Now if I just start scaling now, I'm only going to be affecting the first joint in the chain. So I need to open up that whole chain, select them all, and then scale down until that joint chain fits my rig. All right. So now we have our joints created. They're in the right place, and they are straight up in a straight line. And but it has some scale values on it, and we don't need that. We don't want that. So what I do in this case is I put that on another layer. Let's temporarily reference it. So you click that button until it switches to R. And now we can use the joint tool again and vertex snap, holding down V. Okay, let's delete that first chain because now we have a new chain that has 0 translations and scales on it, and I'll delete that layer. We don't need that layer anymore. All right, the next thing I'd like to point out is why I put spines in a straight line. And if you draw if you look at any human back, they're always in this sort of shape, right? Sort of an S curve, like a backward S. So that is, realistic. I mean, maybe not that exaggerated, but you get the idea. But if we take a closer look at this and look at the rotation orientations of all these joints, let's go to select them all and then go to transform display. Let's add that to the shelf, that local rotation axis. So now we can see that these joints are all oriented differently, and consistency is really important. If I were to, rotate that joint and that joint, which are different, right? But if I were to rotate them in X, they rotate very differently, and that's a problem. What if I was going to rotate Z? So one is going forward and one is going backwards. So that's very unpredictable. And yes, you could reorient all of these, but it would still not behave the way that it should. So even though in the real world a spine looks like that, it's not actually the best way to rig a spine. A spine should be in a straight line in the computer graphics world, and it makes the bending and deformation results much more predictable and natural. Okay, so the other thing I'd like to point out is some of you may see your joint icons either very small or very large. You can adjust that over here in the radius. So if I type in, let's say, 0.3, all the joints will change size. You can also get at that control under display animation joint size. And this is another place where you can change all of those at once. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this at 0.3 though. Okay, next thing is we need to name our joints. So these are all going to be bound to that torso. So I'm going to call them JTB for joint bind. JTB spine 01. It's copying that first part of the name. That's 02, 03, 3, 4. That's 5. This is 6 and 7. Now this last one is a terminal joint and it's not going to be bound, so I'm going to call it JTE for joint end. All right, next step is we need to set up the rotation orders for all of these, and we're going to do this for all of the controls on the spine. They're all going to be ZXY. And to do that, you just go into the attribute editor and look in the transform of the joint, and you can see that there is a rotate order set to XYZ. That's the default in Maya, but in our case for the spine, we would prefer to have the rotations be in ZXY. And that will help us not run into gimbal lock where, basically you can see an example of it right here. If I rotate the character forward, notice that X and Z are beginning to meet and become parallel with one another. That's called gimbal lock, and I cannot rotate either one of these. They both do the same thing. So I've lost one of my 3 axes of movement. So that's definitely not what we want. And we need to change their rotation order to be ZXY. Now I could do this one at a time, or I could do a quick little script. So I'd like to show that to you because scripts in Maya are incredibly useful. And if you plan on doing any rigging and so on in the future, it would benefit you to make tools and add them to your shelf as you go. So for this script, I'm just going to make a very simple script that's going to look at everything in the selection and set a value, an attribute on all of them all at once. So to do that, you make a for loop. So I'm going to type here in my script editor for, and then parentheses, open, close, and we're going to, inside that parentheses, put a string variable here. It's going to be $ selection in, and then the tilde key, ls-sl-l, and then close the tilde key. And after the parentheses, we're going to open up a bracket, so a left bracket there, hit return, and down here we're going to type set adder, and then in parentheses, we'll type in our variable again, selection, and we'll have a plus because we're going to concatenate this attribute to all of the things in our selected list. So selection plus quotes dot rotate order end quote. All right, and then outside of that parentheses, we're going to type 2, and 2 is the flag for ZXY. You can look that up in the documentation. All right, so we've got the script now, and I'm just going to, I could select all the joints, or I could drag it up to my shelf first. Let's do that. All right, and let's select all the joints in the chain and click our button up here. And now if we look at all of the rotate orders, they're all ZXY. Good. All right, so if I want to make this a little more clear, I've already made this button previously. I just called it ZXY. To do that, you just go to Edit, Shelves, and you can give it a little descriptor here. You could say set rotation orders to ZXY on selected objects. Okay, and then we'll call this ZXY2. All right, so now we've got a button up here. I'm going to delete it because I've already got it up on my shelf from a previous project. Okay, next step is we need to make a spline IK handle that runs through this joint chain. So to do that, let's go up to Skeleton, IK Spline Handle tool, reset the tool here, and we're going to go from the base to the end joint. And let's rename this while we're here, IK Handle Spine. And this is going to be Curve Spine. And here's the effector in the last joint at the end of the chain. Let's name that as well, Effector Spine. Now this control curve here is what controls the back. So I could rotate the back in all the axes that way. I can move it around. And all I'm doing is I'm moving that curve. And that also means that I can move the components on that curve and affect the spine as well. So if I go to component mode and let's turn everything off and then just only turn on the NURBS CVs, I can grab a CV and the whole spine will bend. So there's lots of ways that you could set up a spine. One way would be to perhaps add some sort of deformer like a cluster to each one of these CVs, and then you could move and rotate, transform the clusters and to affect the back. Or what I like to do is what I learned from Jason Schleifer, who's a master rigger. He has another approach where he creates a joint at the bottom of the chain and a joint at the end of the chain, and those are bound with a smooth bind to that spline curve, okay, for the spine. So I'm going to go back into object mode, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to duplicate my chain here because I know all my rotation orders are set correctly. So I'm going to duplicate that, Control D, delete all of the children inside of it, and this is going to be called JTB hips. And I'm going to duplicate it again, and this is going to be JTB shoulders. All right, so if I just look at these three things on their own, hit Shift I to isolate selection. The shoulders, so on top of the hips right now. Let's actually move that up. Shoulders, snap it up with a V, middle mouse, snap it. All right, let's select these three things. Shift I to isolate selection. The shortcut button for that is right here. All right, so for this, right now I want to just bind the curve to these two joints, and then I can control these two joints and the whole rig will move. So I'm going to select all three of them and go up to Skin, Smooth Bind, and let's just reset the settings and selected joints for the bind to, bind, skin. And now if I move those joints, here's the hip down here, the whole curve moves and I can rotate it, all kinds of things, right? And the whole rig will move, so you can see it here. All right, great. So that's what we want. Now let's build some controls for those two joints. And what I've learned from other riggers, making a great interface for the animator definitely pays dividends. It makes the animator more efficient, they're happier, less complaining, it's great. So what I've found is a very good icon for the hips and the shoulders is something that will indicate to the animator that can be rotated and translated. So some sort of combination between a circle and an arrow is good for both. And but you don't want it to get in the way of the rest of the character. So keep it simple and keep it tight and close to the character. So for this, I'm going to draw a circle, and I'll just show you this one, and then I've already made buttons to do these things, so I'll just show you once how you do this, and then I'll fast forward the video so you don't have to watch me set it up. But again, it's good to make a shelf. You can make a custom shelf. Go here, make a new shelf, just call it rigging, whatever you want, and put all your tools up here that you build as you go, so you don't have to redo complicated things like this over and over again. So I'm going to type 3 for actually let's do 2. 2 for the scale on that. And go to the top view and we'll draw an arrow. So go to create. Let's do EP curve tool and we'll set that to be linear. And I'm just going to snap to the grid. 1, 2. Okay, hit return. So, and I'm just going to move, I'll scale all of these down. And maybe like that. And then pull these CVs over to the curve. All right, and let's go back into object mode. All right, now I'm going to duplicate and rotate this 3 times. Control D and rotate with my rotate tool, and J to snap to 15-degree increments, and then Shift D to duplicate 2 more times. Okay, so the way I do this is I select all those curves, including the circle, put it on a layer, a display layer, and reference the layer. And then from the top view using my CV curve tool. So we'll go to create CV curve tool, make sure it's a 3rd degree curve. All right. Then from there, I can hold down my C key to snap to the curve right there. So C, and I'm going to click and drag 3 times down to create a point. And every time there's a corner, you have to click 3 times. And notice I just went off and it snapped up here. I can middle mouse drag that back, okay, where it needs to go. So 1, okay, now left mouse, 2, 3, and we'll just do that on each of these corners. Okay, and now we're jumping over to the circle part. And here's the arrow again, so let's left mouse on that, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward the video here and show you how to set it up as a button on your shelf. Okay, so I've finished up the icon here, and now I'm just going to go into my script editor and copy the code that made that curve. And it's right here. And let's just middle mouse drag that up to my shelf. It's a Mel script. And we can delete all of these curves. And now if I click that button, boom, I've got my control curve there. So that's a great way to create icons once, make really nice icons all as a single curve without having to combine any shapes. And just click the button and boom, you've got that shelf. You can take it wherever you want. All right, so from here, let's make the shoulder controls as well. And I feel like maybe these arrows are a little bit too wide, so I made another script that is a little bit tighter, and I can scale that down like so. I think that works a little bit better for me. And I'm going to clean that up with all the rotations and transformations and so on. So let's freeze transform and delete the history on that. Cool. All right, let's do the shoulder now. And the shoulder is going to be a similar type of icon, but the arms are kind of in the way, so we'll build it from a side view instead of a top-down view. So I'm going to create a circle. Let's rotate it in Z. And let's scale it up a little bit. All right, same idea. From the side view, we'll draw some arrows. And let's just click with the X key to snap to the grid. And I'm going to scale that and bring it closer. Okay, and maybe pull that in a little bit. Okay, so I want to have that on the other side as well. So let's duplicate it, rotate it in 180x. You know, perhaps scale this up a little. Okay, so that will be our icon. We just have to trace it and make a button for it. So again, I'm going to grab these and put them on that layer that I made previously. And now they're referenced. And now I'll start tracing over this. So with the CV curve tool. So create CV curve tool. And I start right here. Hold down C. 1, 2, 3. And we'll do that at each corner. 3 clicks for each corner. And I'm going to fast forward the video so you can see the result. Okay, so I've finished up this icon, and let's grab the code for that as well. And here it is, just triple click and to select the whole line and bring it up to the shelf. It's a Mel script. All right, great. So we've got some nice controls here, and we've made buttons for them. So if we ever have to make a character again, we can use those very quickly. I'm going to grab all of these and just click on my button there that I just made. So we have a nice icon for the shoulders. So this is going to be CTRL, shoulders, anim. And this one right here is going to be for the hips. So CTRL, hips, anim. I'm sort of redundant in my naming, so I want to let the animator know that this is a curve to be animated. And so I tag it with anim. It's also a control curve. And I make a distinction between two different kinds of control curves in Maya. There are control curves that I want the animator to touch and control curves that I don't want the animator to touch, or maybe they only touch them once when they load up the scene. So that's why I call them control and then have an anim. It's a little bit redundant, but sometimes I have controls that are not animatable, so I do not include that suffix. All right. It's also easier to read in a list, and I can select them up here just by going to select by name, and I could type in wildcard anim, and it will select all the animation curves that I want the animator could control, and I could theoretically from there create a character set, which would have all of the keyable attributes for all of the animated controls. So it's good to name your things carefully like that. All right, now we need to set the rotation orders of these to ZXY to match the spine. So I'll select them and I'll use our button that we made previously, ZXY, and it just set the rotation orders of the transform to ZXY for both of those. The shoulders need to be moved up here. And then from there, we will create, well, let's freeze transforms on that actually. So these two controls, let's freeze the transformations. All right. Now we just need to put these two joints in the right place. So the hips goes into the hips, and the shoulder joint goes into the shoulders anim curve. Now I can grab these controls and move them around. All right, I've got my rotation set to gimbal still, but if I go to object mode, I can just tumble by grabbing right in the middle. All right, so these are working, but notice that there's no twist. And there is a twist attribute on the IK right here. So if you select the IK handle and go over to the attributes over here, there's a roll, which is like they all roll the same. There's twist. I want to connect that twist to these controls. To do that, you go into the attribute editor for the IK handle tool, and I'm going to copy this tab so that as I select different things, the window stays up and I don't lose it. So we'll click copy tab, we can close that now. So with this copy, open up the IK solver attributes and go to advanced twist controls. And we're going to enable the twist controls and select object rotation up, start, end. This is going to be negative Z, okay, because the up part of the back is toward negative Z. This is going to be 0. This is -1, 0, -1. The world up and object for 1 and 2 is going to be the hips and shoulders. So if I go over here and just copy the hips, that's going to be the first one. And then the second one is the shoulders. Okay, now if I check this out, they twist. Nice. Okay. So the next step is to create some FK controls. To do that, I'm going to duplicate this joint here and delete its children and rename it. And the reason I do that, and I do that often, is because I want to just duplicate everything about that joint, the rotation order, where it is. So it's easier to do that for me. I'm going to call this JT FK Spine 01. And I'm going to duplicate that and snap it to that third joint. And we'll do that again, duplicate and move up to this joint and Control D again and put that on the end. Okay, so we have these 3 FK joints and they're separate right now. They're not part of the same hierarchy. So Shift I, just to show you this in isolation mode. I want this to be a parent of that. So hit P to parent, select this, then this, P to parent, this, P to parent. You could also do middle mouse dragging in the outliner to do the same thing. All right, so for these controls, we want to just be able to rotate the character, around like so. And, these controls should match the world space controls of the animator that they would be dealing with. So right now they're not correct. Let's go to our local rotation axis and you can see that X is pointing down the chain, but actually in this case, we want Y to go down the chain. So let's switch that. Let's select everything in this hierarchy, go to skeleton orient joint, and we'll do YZZ. You can reset the settings and just click YZZ and click apply. All right, so now you can see if you look at the little compass here in the bottom left corner, Z is facing forward, of course, X is this way, and Y is up. So we have these matching what our animator would be animating. The one thing though is this last joint, which doesn't provide any real animation or manipulation for the character. I still like to be clean about it, and I zero it so that the joint orientations are 0 and they're basically inheriting the orientation of the parent. All right, let's turn off the local rotation axis on those. And let's also set the rotation order, because right now the rotation order, oh, they are correct, of course, because I duplicated from the previous joint. But if they aren't, you can just grab all those joints in the chain and run our script ZXY, and that will fix that. Shift I to go back. All right, now the next step is to set this up. So this control right here, this curve, I'm going to group this, and this group is going to be called GRP shoulders offset. All right, and let's set the rotation order of that as well to ZXY. And I want that pivot point to be up here. So I'm going to hold D and V and middle mouse snap it. D and V and middle mouse snap the pivot point up there. You can also hit the home key or insert key on your keypad, and that will go into edit pivot mode as well. All right, so that basically is going to be driven by the last joint in the FK, the third joint in the FK spine. So I'm going to select that third joint and then command click on the offset group there and parent. All right. So now if I rotate anything in the chain, the IK rig follows. So basically the IK is a child of the FK. That's what I just done here. So there's a parent constraint inside there. All right, and then let's create some controls for those FK rotations. So for that, let's just create some circles. We'll go to NURBS, primitive circle, and let's scale it up so that it goes around the model, perhaps like that. And let's snap it there. Let's duplicate that, snap that to the other FK joint. All right. So if you look at these in isolation, let's look at the FK chain and then these two curves that we've just made. This is what we have so far. And we want to connect these to the rig. But before we do that, notice that there's all these transforms on it and so on. We need to get rid of those and clean it up. So here's another opportunity to create either a script or a button on our shelf to do this sort of thing, because we're going to have to do this over and over and over again. Let's save ourselves some hassle and time and make a script that will do this once and for all. So open up the script editor, and here's another little trick. If you go to new tab, let's make a mail script here. I'm going to clear the history. So we'll go to edit, clear history, and I'm going to turn on history, echo all commands. And so you can see everything that we do. So I'm going to select these two curves and go to, let's center the pivot, freeze the transforms, and then delete the history. So delete all by type. Delete by type history. Okay, now we can turn off echo all commands. And we do have to do a little bit of wading through all these scripts that were generated automatically, but you can kind of see what you need pretty quickly. Here's our selection. Let's see. Here's the center pivot and X form. We just need the center pivot and the freeze transformations. That's going to be on another line. And delete by type history is the one we're looking for now. Here it is. Delete history. Okay, so here's our script, and I don't want to have to do that over and over again. So I'm going to middle mouse drag that up to my shelf and edit it, and let's just call it clean. Okay, and we'll change, yeah, we'll just leave the tooltip what it is, center pivot freeze transformations, delete history. And you know what, we could change the color of that to be red so it's a little easier to see, and maybe darken up the background behind it. Save that. Great. All right, so now we have these control curves all cleaned up. We just click our button. I'm going to delete these two. Don't need those right now. Those are the curves that I made previously, but I already have some control curves for that. Okay. So, and I want to change the color of these to be a little easier to see. So I'm going to go into the attribute editor for it and go to display, drawing overrides, enable override, and choose a color like blue. Let's do the same for this one. Okay. Shift I to go back into the main view here. And I want to parent or I want to parent constrain those joints to these curves. So I'll select this one right here. Let's call this CTRL FK spine 01. Oh, and this is going to be anim. And this is going to be CTRL FK spine 02 anim. All right. Now, this curve right here is going to be parent constraining spine 3. Okay, so we go up, we select the curve first, then the joint, and then go to constrain parent. This one is going to be controlling that joint right there. Actually, what we can do is just put this inside of the first one. So now if I rotate this bottom one, the whole rig moves, but I also have control over that one. Okay, let's just do a little bit of cleanup here. Select that control, go into the attribute editor, enable overrides, and let's change it to be a yellow color. All right, great. So let's do some cleanup. We don't need this layer anymore. Let's delete that. And let's clean up the controls on this. I don't want the animator to be worrying about the scale and visibility, so I'll delete that. So we'll lock and hide the selected on that. Let's also get rid of the scale and visibility on the hips as well. These, I only want the animator dealing with rotations. So I'm going to get rid of the translate, hold down Command or Control on the PC, and right click, lock and hide selected. So the animator is only working with rotation on the FK. And let's make one more control that will control the overall torso. Okay, so we'll go up to Create, EP Curve Tool, make sure it's set to linear. Look at this from the top view, and I'm going to hold down the X key and snap a square. I'm going to make a square icon. You know, and believe it or not, there is no square icon in Maya. That's all one continuous shape. The one that is under NURBS primitive square actually creates 4 different curves. So if I want to use that curve over and over again, down the road. Let's just grab that code as well. Bring it up here. Let's rename it. Make square control curve. And then we'll just call it SQCB. All right, so if we ever need that again, boom, just click that button, all set. Now let's call this CTRL torso anim. And I'm going to put all of these controls inside of that. So the FK spine controls are going to go inside there. The hips control, that's going to go in there. The shoulder is a little different. For this, if we rotate this now, you see it moves just fine. So we actually want to keep the shoulder offset outside of that particular hierarchy. But to clean it up, let's put them both inside of a group called control curves. So Control G, GRP, and this will be animation control curves or something like that. Okay. And we can also change the color. Enable overrides. Let's make that yellow as well. So now we can rotate this, but we also have offset control for the hips. We can move it around. Same with the shoulders. And we have FK control on top of all that. So really cool, really nice dynamic rig here. And you could add a stretchy spine to this as well as a second layer, but I'm not going to cover that in this particular tutorial. Let's bind it to the geometry and just make sure it makes sense and it works. So I'm going to untemplate and reference that layer and select the bind joint. So to do that quickly, what I can do is, well, in this case, let's just drag down and select these first 6 joints. I don't need that terminal joint to be a part of this though. And we'll just click on that geometry there and go to Skin Smooth Bind. And we can use just selected joints. Closest distance is fine. We could do a weight blended if we wanted to. That gives you a little more control because it includes classic linear and dual quaternion. There are some newer methods, by the way, that are really amazing in 2015, but I'm just going to use the older method because not many people might not have it. But geodesic voxel is the newest version of the skinning method, and it's really incredible. I'll leave this on interactive. Either one should do fine, post or interactive, but we'll leave that. Max influences, let's decrease that to 4, and we will increase the drop-off rate to about 6. And let's click Bind Skin. And now we can reference the geometry so we don't accidentally select it. And let's do a little more cleanup and put all of the skeleton stuff into a joint folder. So we'll call it group skeleton. And let's make another one for the IK stuff. So the IK handle and the curve, the spine curve. GRP, spine. Let's call this IK. So group IK. And then let's group all of these things together into a group GRP character node. All right, you can name it whatever your name is for your character. Let's put the geometry into a group as well. GRP geometry. And for that geometry, I'm going to actually remove or empty the layer and then just have that group be on that geometry layer. All right, so now we've got visibility control on that. I'm going to hide the IK stuff, so Control H, and the skeleton, I'll hide that as well. But the animation control curves, I'll leave those on. And I'm going to hide these 2 joints that are inside the control curves. So if I go into those control curves, you can see that there's that joint and then there's this joint. And I'm just going to Control H to hide them. All right, now it's pretty clean except this last piece. I need to get rid of the scale and visibility on that. hide. Okay, so that's translate, rotate, translate, rotate. These are rotate. All right, let's test it out. Okay, we have twist. We have FK control. We have overall torso control. Can move it around. And we have rotate on the hips. All in all, this is a really solid rig. I've worked with this rig for a long time now, and I haven't had any problems with it. I hope you enjoyed this.